Welcome to The Survival Historian, where the lessons of the past forge the strength of the future. In the darkest corners of human conflict, where walls close in and hope becomes a fragile thread, something extraordinary emerges. Not weakness, not surrender, but an unbreakable force that defies every attempt to crush it. Today, we explore psychological resilience and the astonishing mental fortitude that allowed prisoners of war to survive torture, isolation, and years of captivity that would shatter most minds within days. Could you survive months, even years of brutal captivity and relentless torment? What you're about to discover will change how you understand the limits of human strength. The cell is 7 feet by 7 feet, the walls sweat with humidity. Rats scurry across the floor in darkness so complete you forget what your own hands look like. This was the reality for countless prisoners of war throughout history, from the jungles of Southeast Asia to the frozen camps of Korea. Yet within these circumstances, the human mind became the ultimate weapon of survival. Psychological resilience is not simply toughness, it's a sophisticated mental framework that transforms unbearable circumstances into challenges that can be managed, reframed, and ultimately survived. Consider naval aviator James Stockdale, shot down over North Vietnam in 1965 and held captive for over 7 years. Subjected to rope torture that dislocated his shoulders, beaten with bamboo clubs, and confined to leg stocks, Stockdale survived by reframing his captivity, not as victimization, but as a test of character. When his captors demanded propaganda statements, he deliberately injured his own face to make himself unpresentable for cameras. This was cognitive reframing at its most powerful, transforming helplessness into agency by choosing his own pain over imposed humiliation. This mental reframing operates at the neurological level. When prisoners actively reinterpret their circumstances, they engage the prefrontal cortex, which helps regulate the amygdala's fear response. A prisoner who tells himself, "I'm being tested and strengthened rather than I'm being destroyed," literally alters his brain chemistry, producing less cortisol and maintaining better cognitive function under stress. Purpose became the anchor that prevented mental drift into madness. British POWs held by the Japanese along the Burma Railway maintained detailed mental calendars, marking each day as one step closer to liberation. American prisoners in the Hanoi Hilton recited the names of their crew members, their families back home. These weren't mere distractions. They were existential lifelines. Viktor Frankl, a psychiatrist who survived Nazi concentration camps, observed that prisoners who maintained a future orientation possessed dramatically higher survival rates. The mind requires a destination. Without one, it simply stops fighting. Solitary confinement represents one of the most psychologically devastating forms of torture, precisely because it severs the social bonds that human consciousness requires to function. Yet prisoners found ways to reach across concrete walls with extraordinary ingenuity. The tap code became legendary among American POWs in Vietnam. Based on a 5x5 letter grid, prisoners could communicate entire sentences by tapping on walls or pipes. Isolation loses its power when you know that beyond that wall, another human being is listening. The shared experience of suffering created bonds that transcended normal friendship. When one man weakened, others shouldered his burden. Prisoners pooled meager rations to keep the sickest alive. They fabricated elaborate fantasy meals, describing in excruciating detail the steaks and desserts they would eat upon liberation. This was collective resistance, a way of maintaining connection to normalcy through shared ritual. The guards could control the body, but they could never fully penetrate the mental space that prisoners created together. Torture is designed not merely to extract information, but to obliterate identity. Rope torture hyperextended shoulders until tendons tore. Sleep deprivation for days produced hallucinations and temporary psychosis. Mock executions created atmospheres of existential terror. Yet even here, the resilient mind found countermeasures. Dissociation became a survival tool. Prisoners reported mentally separating from their bodies during torture, observing the scene as if from above or imagining themselves elsewhere entirely. Modern neuroscience recognizes dissociation as a protective mechanism where the brain compartmentalizes overwhelming trauma to preserve core psychological functions. A prisoner being beaten might recite poetry, replay childhood memories, or conduct complex mathematical calculations. The body suffers, but the self retreats to a protected space where the torturer cannot reach. Maintaining microcontrols preserved sanity when macrocontrol was impossible. Prisoners established rigid personal routines, exercises performed in specific sequences, mental review sessions at designated times, deliberate organization of their cell space. Air Force Captain John Dramasi, imprisoned in Vietnam, maintained a brutal exercise regimen in his tiny cell, doing thousands of push-ups and sit-ups daily. This wasn't about physical fitness. It was about asserting that his captors controlled his circumstances, but not his choices. Even the smallest decision freely made became an act of psychological resistance. The strategies that allowed POWs to survive reveal fundamental truths about human psychology that remain relevant today. The modern world produces its own forms of psychological siege, chronic stress, social isolation, economic uncertainty. The same mental frameworks that sustained prisoners can fortify anyone facing adversity. Cognitive reframing helps you transform setbacks into growth opportunities. Maintaining purpose provides direction when circumstances feel chaotic. Building strong social networks creates the support structure that prevents collapse during crisis. These aren't metaphors, they're practical tools with decades of empirical validation. Perhaps most remarkably, research into post-traumatic growth reveals that many former POWs reported their captivity ultimately strengthened them. They developed deeper empathy, clearer priorities, and profound appreciation for freedom and human connection. This doesn't minimize their suffering. It demonstrates that the human mind possesses an almost incomprehensible capacity not just to survive trauma, but to forge meaning from it. The next time you face a challenge that feels insurmountable, remember the men who survived years in cells smaller than your bathroom. They didn't possess special powers. They employed mental strategies that you can learn and apply. If this exploration has given you new perspective on your own capacity for resilience, share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to The Survival Historian for more insights into how history's hardest lessons forge tomorrow's strength. The past doesn't just teach us what happened, it teaches us what's possible when the human spirit refuses to break.